It grabbed the horse by the hoof. Then it smiled, and it had a beak for a mouth. Welcome to local legends. Today, the Kappa. The river runs shallow here, over smooth stones worn pale by centuries of current. Willow branches trail in the water like long hair, and the air smells of wet clay and algae. It is late afternoon in summer, the hour when shadows lengthen across rice paddies, and the heat begins to loosen its grip on the valley. The water moves slowly, almost without sound, except for the occasional plop of a fish surfacing or a frog leaping from the bank. A dragonfly hovers above a cluster of lily pads, its wings catching the slanted light. Everything is still, suspended in that peculiar quiet that comes just before dusk. And then, if you watch long enough, you might see the water ripple in a way that has nothing to do with wind. A disturbance near the shallows, where the stones give way to mud. A shape, small and hunched, moving just beneath the surface. The willows shiver though the air is calm, and somewhere, deeper in the reeds, there is a sound like laughter, high and thin, almost childlike. This is Kappa country. The Kappa, literally river child in Japanese, is not a creature of mountains or forests, not a beast that stalks the high places or the deep wilderness. It is a thing of margins, of the liminal spaces where water meets land, where the cultivated world of rice paddies and villages presses against the wild, unpredictable flow of rivers and ponds. It is a creature born from the daily intimacy between Japanese rural life and water, from the thousand small dangers and mysteries that attended every crossing, every irrigation channel, every summer swim. To understand the Kappa is to understand a very specific relationship between a people and their environment, a relationship governed by respect, caution, and a kind of wary negotiation with forces that could give life or take it away with equal indifference. The islands of Japan are veined with water. Rivers cascade down from volcanic peaks, carving valleys through dense forest, before spreading into wide sediment, rich plains. Rice cultivation, the foundation of Japanese agriculture for millennia, depends entirely on the careful management of water. The flooding of paddies, the maintenance of irrigation channels, the timing of planting and harvest to the rhythms of rain and drought. For the rural communities that practiced this agriculture, water was both sustenance and threat. It brought fertility to the fields, but it also brought floods, drownings, disease. Children played in rivers and ponds during the scorching summer months, but every village could recite the names of those who had slipped beneath the surface and never returned. Into this landscape, both physical and psychological, the Kappa was born. The legend is old. References appear in texts from as early as the Edo period 1603–1868, though the folklore almost certainly predates written records. The Kappa was, and in many places still is, treated not as a mythological abstraction, but as a real, if rarely seen, inhabitant of the waterways. Statues of Kappa stand guard at bridges. Offerings are left at riverbanks. Warnings about Kappa are given to children with the same seriousness as warnings about deep water or strong currents, because in the logic of the legend, the Kappa is the deep water and the strong current, given form and intent. Japanese cosmology, particularly as it developed through the syncretic blend of indigenous Shinto beliefs and imported Buddhism, is populated with a vast array of spirits, yokai supernatural creatures, and kami deities or sacred presences. These beings occupy every corner of the natural world. Mountains have their kami, ancient trees house spirits. Foxes can shapeshift, the sea is filled with dragons. In this crowded spiritual landscape, the Kappa is notable not for its power. It is not a god, not a demon of great rank, but for its specificity. It is localized, particular, almost mundane in its concerns. The Kappa does not represent cosmic forces or moral absolutes. It represents the river itself, in all its capricious, dangerous, necessary presence. The relationship between humans and Kappa is not one of worship or terror, but of negotiation. You do not pray to the Kappa, exactly, but you do acknowledge it. You leave cucumbers at the water's edge, or you bow deeply if you encounter one, or you remember the rules, the ways to trick it, to appease it, to survive an encounter. This is folklore as practical knowledge, a cultural technology for managing the very real dangers of water through story. The kappa is small, roughly the size of a human child, standing perhaps 3 to 4 feet tall, around 1 meter. Its skin is greenish or yellowish, slick and amphibious, sometimes described as covered in scales or a fine, slimy film. Its hands and feet are webbed, the fingers long and unnaturally flexible. On its back is a turtle shell, hard and rounded, offering protection. Its face is perhaps its most unsettling feature. The mouth is beaked, like a turtle's, sharp-edged and lipless, capable of a wide, toothy grin. The eyes are large, round, and unblinking. Some accounts give it a pronounced snout. Others describe the face as flatter, almost simian. The smell is said to be pungent, fishy, like mud and rotting vegetation. But the defining feature, the trait that appears in nearly every description, is the sara, a shallow, bowl-like depression on the top of the kappa's head. This depression holds water, and the water is the source of the kappa's supernatural strength and vitality. As long as the sara remains filled, the kappa possesses the power to drag a full-grown horse into a pond, to wrestle an adult human underwater with ease, to move with uncanny speed through currents. If the water spills, however, the kappa becomes weak, clumsy, even vulnerable. This detail is crucial, both to the legend's internal logic and to the strategies humans have devised for dealing with kappa. Regional variations abound. In some areas, the kappa is called Kawataro, river boy, Gawapa, or Kawako, river child. In the Tohoku region of northern Honshu, kappa are sometimes described as more aggressive, prone to attacking travelers or farmers who work too close to the water's edge. In the southern island of Kyushu, certain villagers tell of kappa that are more mischievous than malevolent, playing pranks like stealing crops or making loud noises at night, but rarely causing serious harm. Some accounts describe the kappa as having a taste for very specific things. The shirikodama, an imagined ball of flesh located in the anus, which the kappa supposedly extracts from drowning victims. This grotesque detail, often omitted from sanitized retellings, speaks to the legend's roots in trying to explain and cope with the horror of death by drowning. The way bodies are found bloated and damaged, the violation of seeing a loved one transformed by water. Other descriptions emphasize the kappa's strange manners. Despite its monstrous appearance and dangerous strength, the kappa is said to be obsessed with politeness and social decorum, bound by the same rules of etiquette that govern human interaction in traditional Japanese society. If you bow deeply to a kappa, it will bow back, and in bowing, the water will spill from its sara, rendering it powerless. This paradox, the idea of a creature both savage and courteous, is central to the kappa's character. It is not simply a monster. It is a reflection of the values and anxieties of the culture that created it. The kappa is omnivorous, but particular. It is fond of cucumbers, a preference so well known that kappa, maki, cucumber, sushi rolls are named after the creature. It also likes eggplant, and in some regions, offerings of these vegetables are left at riversides to placate the local kappa. The reason for this preference is not entirely clear. Perhaps cucumbers, with their high water content and cooling properties, were seen as appropriate offerings to a water creature, or perhaps the tradition arose from practical associations between cucumber season and the summer months, when drowning deaths were most common. Beyond vegetables, the kappa is said to hunt frogs, fish, and occasionally livestock. Horses are a particular target. There are numerous legends of kappa leaping from the water to grab horses by the hoof or leg, attempting to drag them into the river. In some stories, the kappa succeeds. In others, the horse's strength or the farmer's quick thinking saves the animal. The kappa's interest in horses may reflect real anxieties about the dangers of river crossings for pack animals, and the economic disaster that would follow the loss of such valuable property. The legends surrounding the kappa are not epic tales of heroes and quests, but small, pointed stories that function almost like fables or cautionary tales. They are the kind of stories told at night by the fire or whispered to children before they go swimming. Stories designed to teach a lesson or impart practical wisdom wrapped in supernatural dressing. One of the most famous is the story of the farmer and the Kappa's arm. In this tale, a Kappa emerges from a river and attacks the farmer's horse. The farmer, quick-witted and strong, manages to fight off the creature, and in the struggle, he severs one of the Kappa's arms. The Kappa flees back into the water. That night, the farmer hears a voice outside his house. The Kappa has returned, weeping and begging for its arm to be returned. The farmer agrees, but only if the Kappa promises never to harm his family or livestock again. The Kappa agrees. The farmer returns the arm, and the Kappa reattaches it. Kappa limbs, in some versions, can be pulled off and reattached, and keeps its promise. From that day forward, the farmer's fields are protected and his family is safe. The story ends with the farmer and the Kappa living in a kind of truce, each respecting the other's boundaries. This tale encapsulates several key aspects of the Kappa legend. First, the creature is not invincible. It can be harmed, tricked, or bested by a clever human. Second, the Kappa is capable of honoring agreements, of keeping its word. It operates within a moral framework, even if that framework is alien to human sensibilities. Third, the resolution is not the Kappa's destruction, but a negotiated coexistence. The river remains dangerous, but the danger can be managed through respect and understanding. Another well-known story involves a Kappa challenging a human to a sumo wrestling match. The Kappa, proud and boastful, insists it can defeat any human. A young man accepts the challenge, but bows deeply before the match begins. As is customary, the Kappa, bound by politeness, bows back. The water spills from its sara, weakened. The Kappa is easily defeated, humiliated. It begs for mercy and promises to teach the young man the secrets of bone, setting and herbal medicine in exchange for being allowed to return to the river. The young man agrees. The Kappa fulfills its promise, and the young man becomes a renowned healer. This story, found in various forms across Japan, explains the origin of certain traditional medical practices, attributing them to Kappa knowledge, and reinforces the theme of cunning over brute strength. Then there is the legend of the cucumber offering. In this tale, a village plagued by Kappa attacks decides to make a deal. They carve the names of all the village's children onto cucumbers, and throw them into the river as offerings. The Kappa, seeing that the cucumbers bear the names of those it has been attacking, realizes that the humans are trying to protect their own and agrees to leave the village in peace if the offerings continue. The cucumbers are a substitute, a symbolic sacrifice that prevents real harm. This story likely reflects an actual ritual practice, a way of ritualizing and thus controlling fear. These legends, and dozens like them, suggest a complex relationship between humans and Kappa. The creature is dangerous, yes, but the danger is not arbitrary. The Kappa operates according to rules, and those rules can be learned, exploited, or negotiated around. This is not a creature of pure chaos or malevolence, but a force that, like the river itself, can be deadly if approached carelessly, but navigated if one knows what one is doing. The question of how the Kappa legend originated has occupied folklorists, anthropologists, and historians for more than a century. Several theories have been proposed, none mutually exclusive. The most straightforward explanation is that the Kappa legend functions as a warning about water safety, particularly for children. Rural Japan, with its numerous rivers, irrigation channels, and rice paddies, presented countless opportunities for accidental drownings. Children playing unsupervised near water, swimming in unfamiliar ponds, or venturing too close to fast moving currents faced real and constant danger. Telling children that the Kappa would grab them if they went into the river alone was a way of encoding this danger in a form that would be memorable and emotionally resonant. The Kappa in this reading is a personification of drowning itself, a way of making an abstract threat concrete. Supporting this theory is the fact that Kappa legends are most common in agricultural regions, where water management is crucial and where children would have had regular, unsupervised access to water. The seasonal pattern of Kappa sightings and attacks also aligns with the summer months, when children are most likely to be swimming, and when drowning deaths historically peaked. A related theory suggests that the Kappa legend arose from attempts to explain and cope with the trauma of finding drowned bodies. Drowning does specific, disturbing things to the human body. Decomposition in water causes bloating, discoloration, and the loosening of limbs. Bodies recovered from rivers often show damage from rocks, debris, or scavengers. The horror of seeing a loved one in this state, the violation of the body's integrity, might be easier to process if attributed to the actions of a malevolent creature, rather than the impersonal physics of water and decay. The Kappa's supposed habit of extracting the shirikodama is particularly suggestive in this context. Some researchers have suggested that the Kappa legend may be a garbled folk memory or mythologized account of real animals. The Japanese giant salamander, which can grow up to 5 feet (1.5 meters) in length, inhabits the rivers and streams of western Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. It is an ancient, strange-looking creature with slimy skin, a broad flat head, and a surprisingly strong grip. It is nocturnal and rarely seen. A startled farmer encountering a giant salamander in a river at dusk, particularly if unfamiliar with the species, might well describe it in terms that would, over generations of retelling, evolve into the Kappa. Similarly, the Japanese river otter, once common in rivers across Japan but now extinct, was known for its playful behavior, its curiosity, and its habit of standing upright in shallow water. Could distant sightings of otters, misinterpreted and embellished, have contributed to the Kappa legend? It is possible, though. Such explanations struggle to account for the richness and specificity of Kappa lore. The Sara, the turtle shell, these details seem too elaborate to be simple misidentifications. A third approach examines the Kappa legend through the lens of religious and spiritual belief. In Shinto, the indigenous religion of Japan, the natural world is filled with kami, sacred presences that inhabit and animate mountains, rivers, trees, and rocks. These kami are not gods in the Western sense. They are localized, often capricious, and must be acknowledged and appeased. The Kappa fits comfortably into this framework. It is not a kami, exactly, but a yokai, a category of supernatural beings that includes everything from malevolent spirits to mischievous shapeshifters to ambiguous creatures like the Kappa. Yokai are liminal beings, existing in the spaces between the human world and the world of the kami, between the natural and the supernatural. The Kappa, then, might be understood as a way of personifying the river's kami, of giving it a face and a set of behaviors that make it possible to relate to. If the river is not just a physical feature but a living, willful presence, then leaving offerings, observing rituals, and respecting boundaries makes sense. The Kappa is the river's avatar, its voice and hands and teeth. It is also worth considering the social and psychological functions of the Kappa legend within rural communities. In small, tight-knit villages where everyone knew everyone else, where social harmony was maintained through careful adherence to unwritten rules of reciprocity and respect, the Kappa served as a kind of parable about the consequences of violating those rules. The Kappa respects politeness. It honors agreements. It can be reasoned with if approached correctly. These are the same values that governed human interaction in traditional Japanese society. The Kappa, in other words, is not just a river monster. It is a mirror, reflecting cultural ideals and anxieties, back at the community that tells its stories. None of these theories fully explains the Kappa legend, and the truth is likely some combination of all of them. Legends do not arise from single causes. They are the product of history, environment, belief, and the slow accretion of countless retellings, each one adding or subtracting details, each one shaped by the needs and fears of the moment. The Kappa, for all its strangeness, remained largely confined to Japan until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Western scholars, missionaries, and travelers began to take an interest in Japanese folklore. The opening of Japan to the West following the Meiji Restoration in 1868 brought a wave of foreign observers eager to document and interpret a culture that had been largely closed to outside contact for more than 2 centuries. Early Western accounts of Japanese folklore often struggled to categorize creatures like the Kappa within familiar frameworks. European and American readers were accustomed to fairies, goblins, and demons from their own traditions. But the Kappa did not fit neatly into any of these categories. It was not quite a water sprite, not quite a demon, not quite an animal. Some writers translated Kappa as water imp or river goblin, terms that gestured toward European folklore, but inevitably distorted the original. One of the first Western scholars to write seriously about Japanese yokai was Lafcadio Hearn, a Greek-Irish writer who moved to Japan in 1890 and spent the rest of his life there. Hearn's books, including Kwaidan, Stories and Studies of Strange Things, 1904, introduced English-speaking audiences to Japanese ghost stories and supernatural legends. Hearn wrote about the Kappa with a mix of fascination and respect, recognizing that these legends were not quaint superstitions but living parts of Japanese rural culture. In Kwaidan, he recounts several Kappa tales, preserving the creature's essential characteristics: the Sara, the beak, the love of cucumbers, the complex relationship with humans, while framing them for a Western audience as examples of Japan's rich imaginative tradition. Hearn's work was influential, but it also set a pattern that would persist for decades: the presentation of Japanese folklore as exotic, charming, and fundamentally other. The Kappa became, in Western imagination, a curiosity, a strange little creature from a strange distant land, rather than a meaningful cultural symbol with deep roots in the daily lives and anxieties of rural Japanese communities. In the early 20th century, as anthropology developed as an academic discipline, scholars began to approach Japanese folklore more systematically. Kunio Yanagita, often called the father of Japanese folklore studies, published his influential work Tono Monogatari, The Legends of Tono, in 1910, a collection of folktales from the Tohoku region that included numerous Kappa stories. Yanagita's work was groundbreaking in its treatment of folklore as a serious subject worthy of scholarly attention, and his methods influenced generations of researchers, both in Japan and abroad. Yanagita argued that legends like the Kappa were not mere entertainment, but encoded knowledge about the environment, social norms, and historical experience. He documented regional variations in Kappa lore, noting how the creature's characteristics and behavior changed from one village to the next, reflecting local conditions and concerns. In Tono, for instance, the Kappa was more commonly associated with danger and death, while in other regions it was seen as more of a nuisance than a threat. Yanagita's work helped to establish the idea that folklore should be studied in its specific cultural and geographical context, not simply collected as exotic tales. Western anthropologists who came to Japan in the mid-20th century often drew on Yanagita's work. American folklorist Richard Dawson, who visited Japan in the 1950s, wrote about the Kappa in the context of comparative folklore, noting similarities between Japanese water spirits and the Kelpies of Scottish legend or the Nixies of German tradition. These comparisons were useful in demonstrating that the human tendency to populate dangerous natural features with supernatural guardians is cross-cultural, but they also risked flattening the specificities that make each tradition unique. The post-World War II period saw a surge of interest in Japanese culture in the United States and Europe, driven in part by the American occupation of Japan and the growing influence of Japanese cinema, literature, and art. The Kappa, along with other yokai, began to appear in English language books on mythology and folklore. These accounts varied widely in quality. Some, like those by scholar Michael Dillon Foster, treated the Kappa with nuance and attention to cultural context. Others reduced it to a bullet point in a bestiary, a mere curiosity stripped of its deeper meanings. Zone of the challenges in translating the Kappa legend for Western audiences has always been the creature's moral ambiguity. Western folklore tends toward clearer moral categories. Fairies are either helpful or harmful, demons are evil, heroes are good. The Kappa does not fit this schema. It is dangerous, yes, but also capable of gratitude, honor, and even friendship. It can be a teacher, a trickster, a threat, or an ally, depending on the story and the context, which makes the Kappa such a rich figure in Japanese folklore. Can be frustrating for those trying to fit it into simpler narrative structures. The Western fascination with the Kappa has also, at times, veered into trivialization. The creature's small size, its love of cucumbers, and its comical appearance in some depictions have led to a tendency to treat it as cute or whimsical, a quirky bit of Japanese culture suitable for children's books and cartoon characters. This is not entirely wrong. The Kappa does appear in children's stories in Japan, and it can be portrayed in light-hearted ways, but it misses the darker, more serious dimensions of the legend. It is worth noting that the Kappa never became a major subject of Western cryptozoology in the way that, for instance, the Yeti or Loch Ness monster did. Cryptozoologists, those who search for evidence of creatures thought to be mythical or extinct, have generally focused on large elusive animals in remote regions. The Kappa, being small, culturally specific, and clearly embedded in a rich folklore tradition, did not fit the mold. There have been no major Western expeditions to hunt for Kappa, no grainy photographs analyzed by self-proclaimed experts. The Kappa has remained, in the Western imagination, a folkloric creature rather than a cryptozoological one, and perhaps that is for the best. In Japan, however, the story is somewhat different. While educated urbanites may regard the Kappa as folklore, as a charming relic of rural tradition, reports of sightings have persisted into the modern era. On the 1st of August 1984, in the town of Tsushima in Kyushu, a group of children playing near a river claimed to have seen a Kappa. According to their account, recorded in the local newspaper the following day, the creature emerged from the water in the early evening, crouched on a rock, and watched them for several minutes before slipping back into the river. The children described it as small, greenish, with a shell on its back and a strange depression on its head. The description matched traditional Kappa lore closely enough that local authorities took the report seriously, if only to the extent of warning parents to keep their children away from the river after dark. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as Japan underwent rapid modernization and urbanization, there was a curious resurgence of interest in yokai and traditional folklore. Some of this was driven by nostalgia, a sense that something valuable was being lost as rural communities emptied out and old customs faded. Some of it was commercial. Yokai became popular subjects for manga, anime, and television shows, and some of it, perhaps, reflected genuine encounters, or at least genuine belief. In July 1991, a farmer in Aomori Prefecture reported finding strange tracks near his irrigation pond. The tracks, photographed and examined by local media, showed webbed feet and 3 toes. Unlike any domestic animal or known wildlife in the region, the farmer told reporters that he had heard strange splashing sounds at night and found several cucumbers missing from his garden. He suspected a Kappa. The story was reported with a mix of humor and seriousness, the kind of tone that allows for the possibility of the supernatural without fully committing to it. In 1994, a more detailed account emerged from the town of Saiki in Owita Prefecture. A fisherman, interviewed by folklorist Shigeru Mizuki, himself famous for his manga about yokai, described an encounter he claimed to have had in his youth around 1950. He had been fishing alone at dawn when he saw something in the water near the reeds. At first he thought it was a large turtle, but then it stood upright, revealing a humanoid body with a turtle shell on its back. The creature watched him for a moment, its head tilted as if curious, then ducked back underwater. The fisherman said he had not told anyone about the incident for years, fearing ridicule, but Mizuki's interest in yokai gave him the confidence to come forward. Mizuki recorded the story but offered no definitive explanation, noting only that the fisherman seemed sincere and that the details matched traditional descriptions. These modern sightings, if we can call them that, are difficult to evaluate. They are not recorded with the rigor of scientific observation. They involve no physical evidence beyond ambiguous tracks or missing vegetables. The witnesses are often children or elderly people, groups whose testimony is, fairly or unfairly, given less weight in assessing factual claims, and the descriptions are suspiciously consistent with folklore, suggesting either that the witnesses are seeing what they expect to see or that the legends themselves are accurate. What is interesting, however, is not whether these sightings represent genuine encounters with an unknown creature, but what they reveal about the persistence of the Kappa legend in contemporary Japan. Despite decades of industrialization, despite the migration of millions from countryside to city, despite the prevalence of scientific education and skepticism, the Kappa has not disappeared. It remains a living presence in certain communities, a way of talking about the river, about danger, about the uncanny feeling that sometimes arises when you are alone near water at dusk. There are also, of course, hoaxes and misidentifications. In June 2000, a man in Fukuoka Prefecture claimed to have captured a Kappa and displayed it in a jar at a local festival. The Kappa turned out to be a monkey fetus, preserved in formaldehyde, with a turtle shell glued to its back. The hoaxer was fined for fraud. In another case, in 2003, a Kappa mummy displayed at a temple in Kyushu was examined by scientists and found to be a composite creature, assembled from parts of several different animals and coated in resin, a 19th century fabrication, possibly created for religious or commercial purposes. These hoaxes, rather than discrediting the legend, seemed to reinforce its cultural relevance. People wanted to believe in the Kappa, or at least wanted the Kappa to remain a possibility. The Japanese government and local authorities have, at various times, engaged with the Kappa legend in ways that blur the line between folklore and tourism. Many towns and villages with Kappa traditions have erected statues of the creature, often at bridges or riverbanks. These statues serve multiple purposes. They are tourist attractions. They are symbols of local identity. And they are, in some cases, still treated as objects of respect or offering. In the town of Kappabashi in Tokyo, a neighborhood famous for its kitchenware shops, the streets are decorated with Kappa imagery, and the area holds an annual Kappa festival. In Tono, the region documented by Kunio Yanagita, there is a Kappa pond Kappa Buchi, where visitors can try to lure Kappa with cucumbers attached to fishing lines. It is playful, commercialized folklore, but it is also a way of keeping the legend alive, of maintaining a connection to the past. In the 1990s and early 2000s, as Japan grappled with pollution and the degradation of its waterways, environmental groups used Kappa imagery in campaigns to clean up rivers and protect wetlands. The message was clear: if the rivers are too polluted for Kappa, they are too polluted for us. The Kappa, once a warning about the dangers of water, became a symbol of the water's vulnerability, a way of personifying the need for ecological stewardship. The Kappa's journey into popular culture began in earnest in the 20th century, as Japan's entertainment industries grew and traditional folklore was adapted for new media. One of the earliest and most influential depictions of the Kappa in modern literature came from Ryunosuke Akutagawa, one of Japan's most celebrated writers. In 1927, Akutagawa published a novella titled Kappa, a satirical work in which the narrator finds himself in a country inhabited by Kappa. The story is a biting critique of Japanese society, with the Kappa serving as a distorted mirror reflecting human absurdity and hypocrisy. Akutagawa's Kappa are fully sentient, possessing their own culture, economy, and social structures. But these structures are revealed to be as irrational and oppressive as those of humans. The novella was one of Akutagawa's last works. He died by suicide later that year, and it stands as a darkly philosophical take on the folklore, stripping away the creature's connection to rivers and water to focus on its potential as allegory. In the post-war period, as Japan rebuilt and its popular culture began to flourish, the Kappa became a common figure in manga and anime. Shigeru Mizuki, the folklorist and manga artist mentioned earlier, included Kappa in his long-running Jigei no Kitaro series, which began in 1960, and introduced generations of Japanese children to traditional yokai. Mizuki's Kappa are portrayed with a mix of humor and respect, sometimes as comic relief characters, sometimes as more serious figures embodying traditional values. Mizuki's work was instrumental in keeping yokai lore alive in the popular imagination during a period when traditional culture was under threat from rapid modernization. In the 1960s and 1970s, Kappa began appearing in kaiju giant monster films and tokusatsu special effects television shows, often as minor characters or threats of the weak. These depictions tended to emphasize the creature's monstrous aspects, turning it into a rubber-suited villain to be defeated by the hero. The nuance of the folklore was largely lost in these adaptations, but they did serve to keep the Kappa in the public eye. The 1980s and 1990s saw a proliferation of Kappa imagery in Japanese advertising, product design, and regional mascots. Kappa appeared on everything from soda bottles to rice bags to train station signage. In this context, the creature was thoroughly domesticated, transformed into a cute, marketable icon that bore only a superficial resemblance to the dangerous water spirit of legend. This is part of a broader phenomenon in Japanese culture, where traditional figures are reimagined as kawaii, cute characters for commercial purposes. The process is both a form of cultural preservation and a form of cultural erasure, keeping the name and basic image alive while stripping away much of the original meaning. Internationally, the Kappa began to appear in fantasy literature and role-playing games in the 1980s. Dungeons and Dragons, the influential tabletop role-playing game, included Kappa as a monster in some of its supplementary materials, describing it as a minor water creature with limited abilities. The video game Final Fantasy series, which began in 1987, has featured Kappa-like creatures in several installments, usually as low-level enemies encountered near water. These depictions introduced the Kappa to a global audience, but they also diluted its cultural specificity, turning it into a generic fantasy creature that could be slotted into any game world. In 1994, the Japanese film Kappa, also known as Death Water, directed by Katsuhide Motoki, attempted a more serious treatment of the legend. The film, a horror story about a woman who encounters Kappa while vacationing in the countryside, played with the ambiguity of the legend, leaving it unclear whether the Kappa are real or manifestations of the protagonist's psychological trauma. The film was not widely seen outside Japan, but it represented an attempt to reclaim the Kappa from its commercialized image and restore some of its original menace. More recently, Kappa have appeared in anime series like Sarazanmai, 2019, a surreal, highly stylized show directed by Kunihiko Akuhara that uses Kappa mythology to explore themes of connection, desire, and identity. In Sarazanmai, the protagonists are transformed into Kappa and forced to confront their deepest secrets. The show treats the Kappa not as a literal creature, but as a symbol, a vehicle for psychological and social commentary. It is a sophisticated, adult take on the folklore, one that acknowledges the Kappa's traditional associations with water, transformation, and boundary, crossing while using them for contemporary storytelling purposes. In English language literature, the Kappa has made occasional appearances, usually in fantasy novels that draw on Japanese folklore. Diana Wynne Jones's novel, Howl's Moving Castle, 1986, includes a brief mention of Kappa, and Neil Gaiman's Anansi Boys 2005 alludes to them in passing. These references are often superficial, nods to the Kappa as an exotic creature from Japanese mythology, without any deep engagement with the legend's cultural context. More serious treatments are rare, but not non-existent. The anthology Yokai Attack, the Japanese Monster Survival Guide 2008 by Hiroko Yoda and Matt Alt, provides a detailed, respectful introduction to Kappa lore for English-speaking readers, including traditional stories, cultural context, and practical advice, mostly tongue-in-cheek, for surviving an encounter. What is notable across all these adaptations is the way the Kappa's core traits, the Sara, the love of cucumbers, the obsession with politeness, have remained relatively stable even as the creature's role and meaning have shifted. These details are distinctive enough, strange enough, that they resist easy assimilation into generic monster archetypes. A Kappa is not just a water monster, it is a specific kind of water monster, and that specificity has helped it retain a degree of cultural identity, even as it circulates in global popular culture. At the same time, something has been lost. The Kappa in video games and anime is rarely dangerous in the way the original folklore suggests. It does not drag horses into rivers. It does not drown children. It does not extract the shirikodama from corpses. It has been sanitized, made safe for mass consumption. This is perhaps inevitable, Popular culture tends to sand down the rough edges of folklore to make it more palatable, more entertaining, less disturbing. But in the process, the original function of the legend, as a warning, as a way of negotiating with danger, as a reflection of real fears about water and death, recedes into the background. The Kappa, then, exists in multiple registers simultaneously. It is a figure of folklore, still believed in by some in rural Japan, still the subject of occasional sightings and offerings. It is a symbol of regional identity, a mascot for towns and festivals. It is a commercial icon, printed on merchandise and featured in advertisements. It is a character in stories, games, and films, adapted and readapted for new audiences and new media. And it is increasingly a subject of academic study, analyzed by folklorists, anthropologists, and cultural historians as a window into Japanese culture, belief, and imagination. To ask whether the Kappa is real is to miss the point. The Kappa is real in the ways that matter. It shapes behavior, encodes knowledge, carries meaning, and yet, there is something haunting about the idea that this story might have a basis in lived experience, that somewhere in the rivers of Japan, something genuinely strange might have been glimpsed, however briefly, and that all the subsequent elaboration and embellishment might have started with a real, inexplicable encounter. The giant salamander, the river otter, the drowned child, the play of light on water. Any or all of these might have contributed to the original sightings, if such sightings occurred. But even if the Kappa began as a misidentification or a misunderstanding, it has become something more. A vessel for cultural anxiety, a tool for teaching, a symbol of the relationship between humans and the natural world. We live now in an age of environmental collapse, of rivers poisoned and depleted, of ecosystems pushed to the brink. In Japan, as elsewhere, rural depopulation has left vast stretches of countryside nearly empty. The old ways of life abandoned, the intimate relationship with land and water that sustained those ways of life fading from memory. The Kappa, born from that relationship, now seems like a relic, a creature from a world that no longer exists. But perhaps that is exactly why the legend persists. The Kappa represents something we have lost or are losing, a sense of the natural world as alive, as populated by presences that demand respect and caution, as something more than a resource to be exploited, or a hazard to be engineered away. The Kappa is a reminder that the river is not just water flowing over rocks, but a living entity with its own character, its own moods, its own dangers. To leave cucumbers at the riverbank, even as a joke or a tourist ritual, is to acknowledge that the river is more than we can fully understand or control. In this sense, the Kappa is not so different from the environmental movements that have adopted it as a symbol. Both are attempts to restore agency to the natural world, to see it not as a backdrop for human activity, but as a participant, a presence with which we must negotiate. The Kappa was always, at its core, a lesson in humility, a reminder that humans are not the only inhabitants of the world, and that the boundaries between the human and the non-human are more porous and perilous than we would like to believe. The legend also speaks to the power of story to shape perception. The child who is told that the Kappa will grab them if they swim alone does not just learn a safety rule, they learn to see the river as a place of mystery and agency, a place that requires respect. They learn that danger can be managed through knowledge and ritual, that the world is full of rules that must be learned and followed. These are lessons that go far beyond water safety, lessons about how to live in a world that is larger and stranger than the human. The Kappa endures because it is weird. It does not fit into easy categories. It is neither fully monstrous nor fully benign. It is comic and terrifying, polite and savage. A creature of water that loves cucumbers, a demon that can be tricked with a bow. It has a turtle shell and a beak and a bowl of water on its head. It is by any measure one of the strangest creations of human imagination. And that strangeness is precisely what makes it memorable, what ensures it will not be forgotten or easily assimilated into generic monster lore. To encounter the Kappa, whether in story or in statue or in the half-believed possibility that somewhere, in some remote river, something matching its description might still lurk, is to be reminded that the world is not entirely knowable, not entirely safe, not entirely ours. It is to feel. For a moment, the old vertigo of standing at the water's edge and sensing that the water is looking back. The river runs shallow here. The willows trail their branches. The dragonflies hover. And somewhere, just beneath the surface, something small and green and patient waits. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more folklore, myths, and mysterious creatures. See you next time.